Hi there, and welcome to A Journey to Milk and Honey. Thank you all for joining me today. In today's episode, I'm going to be chatting with a friend of mine. His name is Brian Grodman. Brian and I haven't been friends for too long, but why I'm bringing Brian on is that about a year ago now, Brian and I traveled to Washington, D.C. on November 14th of last year to attend the largest pro-Israel rally in history. So Brian and I will be sharing a bit about that experience with y'all. But I also wanted to nab Brian because I want to chat with him a bit about the topic of Zionism. Because I don't know about y'all, but really historically, actually my entire life, I've not known or understood anything about Zionism. I had heard the term, but know nothing about it. But since October 7th, I personally have been hearing quite a bit about Zionism, and not in a very positive way. So with that said, I think it's really important that I and we learn some basics about Zionism and Zionists. We're not going to learn everything there is to know in just a few minutes, but I feel for me it is important that I understand some basic facts. And with that, I can dig in further, as can you all. So with that said, hold tight, and I'll be right back with Brian Grodman.
My name is Liz Gabert, and my story begins in the Baptist Bible Belt of West Texas. I married a Catholic man, and together we raised 3 children internationally. Through my travels and experiences, my Jewish faith became secondary to everyday life. Now, after some incredibly powerful events that transpired recently, I'm at a place and time in my life to delve into my Jewish faith. I invite you to join me on this journey where I and an amazing array of weekly guests will enlighten you about the faith, people, and innovations that have shaped Israel and the Jewish people's rich history. Welcome to A Journey to Milk and Honey.
Hey there, just a quick reminder before we get started. If you want to connect with us, we're on all major social media platforms at JMH Podcast. And you can find us on YouTube at JMH Podcast or A Journey to Milk and Honey. You can also find us online at ajourneytomilkandhoney.com or jmhpodcast.com. Oh, and if you enjoy what we do here at A Journey to Milk and Honey, you can help support us by liking, subscribing, or leaving us reviews wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for joining me. Alrighty, so let me introduce y'all to my friend Brian Grodman. Brian is an ardent supporter of Israel. He has served as director of New Hampshire for Israel and is on the executive committee for the Jewish Federation of New Hampshire. Brian was board director of the National Zionist Organization of America, or ZOA, and represents the ZOA on Boston's Jewish Community Relations Committee Council, or JCRC. Brian also serves on the Boston Council Committee for Accuracy and the Middle East, known by the acronym CAMERA, C-A-M-E-R-A. Brian is a financial planner whose articles or quotes have been published in the Boston Globe, New York Times, and Manchester Union Leader. All right, so let's get started. All right. Hey, Brian, how are you today? Thank you for joining me.
It is absolutely my pleasure, Liz. My pleasure.
I appreciate it very much. Before we get started, Brian, I wanted to, let folks know we've known each other for a while. You came and honored me on my radio show a few years back. I can't remember what we talked about, but it must have been great because I got you. That was good. And then move ahead couple of years, and we connected back on November 14th, actually, because it was post October 7th. And I was looking for a traveling buddy to the pro-Israel rally in DC. And we connected, and we actually flew down to DC together and back, didn't we?
Very early flight in the morning down and a very late flight coming back.
And what a pleasure. You're a trooper, man. I tell you, because that was a very long day, and it was a big day and a lot of standing. I know you weren't feeling at your finest, but you were a trooper. And it was just a pleasure to spend that time with you as well.
The feeling is mutual.
All right. Hey, talking about that rally a little bit, Brian, can you share from your perspective a little bit about that? I know you had to conduct some business. It was a full day, but can you share with us how you felt about what happened there?
Sure. The rally took place, as you said, November 14th, which was just a little bit more than 5 weeks after the massacre of October 7th, where numerous people from Israel, both they could be Jews, it could be Thai workers, there were people from India, there were Arabs, people were slaughtered and raped and mutilated, and from thousands of Hamas terrorists. And then Gaza civilians also came in and did a lot of damage, at least property damage and theft, if not more. So this rally took place 5 weeks after that. And it was a point where people who had an affinity for Israel could come together from around the country, especially the East Coast, but there were people from around the country. And I know from at least Chicago, Detroit, and even Los Angeles. So they were upwards, certainly, of close to 100,000 people, if not more. The media reporting, which is generally false in every respect, said there were approximately 1/10 the amount that there were, but all the aerial photographs could show that there were a lot of people there, meaning about 100,000 anyway.
I had actually heard pretty consistently up to 300,000. There were a lot of people there.
But it was a minimum of 100,000. Of course, you can't count
Sure.
them all because just by looking at the space that they occupied. But the media, which is inherently a dishonest group of people, said that there were approximately 10% of how many were there. The speakers included people from politics, there were musicians there were people from all walks of life giving talks with regard to politics on both sides of the aisle, in addition to people who were in the Knesset and the cabinet in Israel. So it was really a place to come together, and the individuals who were there were feeling fairly raw since it was just a little bit over a month since the massacre of October 7th. And it felt good to be there. It felt good to be with like-minded people. And it was just a very good experience. A lot of young people there, a lot of people who are graying and balding up top as well. So it was a great cross-section of Americans.
I think so too. I have mentioned to a lot of people that we got there so early and you had a special seat. I didn't get one of those special seats. I had to stand, don't say a word. I had to stand the whole time, but I was at the front, at the very front, right by the stage. And then you connected me with a few people. Thank you very much. And as we were heading out, we decided to leave a little early. There's a lot of people to miss some of this crowd, and you had to make your way back. And the numbers of young people, it was staggering. And I was so impressed. And their behavior, there was no language, there was no violence, it was just a peaceful gathering, which was just so heartwarming. But the number of young people was what impressed me the most. And I don't know if you saw that too.
Sure. Like I said, many young people. And as far as peaceful gatherings, that's a standard operating procedure for every pro-Israel rally. I've never seen a pro-Israel rally that also did not contain American flags. Never seen one. It's the same people who are patriotic to the United States or are Zionistic and pro-Israel. It's the exact same people, always respectful, singing both God Bless America, the national anthem, Hatikva, and you don't see that on the other side. On the other side, the American flag's being ripped down. And what's amazing and disappointing to me is that there are people who are Americans who don't see what's right in front of them. One side is upholding the American flag, the other side is ripping it down. How can you not know who the good guys are?
Yeah, I agree. We see more and more, thankfully, people standing up for what is right and whether it's related to Israel or not. It just that things are upside down. So let's hone in a little bit on the concept of Zionism, because for me personally, from whence I come, I wasn't subjected to too much anti-Semitism. And actually, I'm not even sure I understood the term, to be honest. to me, a more appropriate, accurate term is Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism for me, until recently, is just confusing. I wasn't sure what that was, just to be honest. And Brian, one more thing before I let you talk. As you know, I grew up in West Texas, and in the 60s and 70s, as a child growing up in West Texas, the best way to deal with Jew hatred was that you just keep quiet. Or in my case, if it ever came up, I would tell people that I was Methodist. Because if they had found out, which they did on occasion, that we were Jewish, we would be teased and ridiculed as the Jesus killers. And that is what I grew up with. We were the Jesus killers. Now, it seems to me that over time, the reasons for Jew hatred have changed. I read an article recently. It talked about how Jew hatred seems to have shape-shifted over time. It points to reasons like, oh, we have been deemed unworthy, unclean, greedy. They have also said that we see ourselves as superior, denying others of opportunities. They also have deemed us as controlling the media, the banks, the governments, and the world. They see us as having so much power that we must be squashed or eliminated, and certainly removed from powerful positions or not even given powerful positions. Now, the latest and greatest Jew hatred is that if I call myself a Zionist, they hate me or they hate us. And if it takes terrorists like Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, Iran, ISIS, anybody, they don't care. So be it. And you see this and hear this everywhere, that Zionism is evil. And with that, I'm going to stop because I'd love to hear your thoughts about the term anti-Semitism and your thoughts about Zionism. So the mic is yours.
Sure. I agree totally. Jew hatred is more accurate than anti-Semitism. And I'm hopeful that the terminology of Jew hatred will soon overtake anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is a nebulous term that very few people would at first understand and second would agree upon. It's just, you would have three different people having three different definitions of what anti-Semitism is, where Jew hatred is very direct. So that's what it is. With regard to Zionism, so people use the term Zionist, sometimes positive, sometimes if they're proud, they're a Zionist, or so-and-so is a Zionist. If they're on the other side of the equation, you're a filthy Zionist, you're a dirty Zionist, kill the Zionist. So what is a Zionist? What is it? What's the root of Zionist? The term Zion is actually mentioned over 100 times in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, over 100 times. And the first time it's mentioned actually is the book of Samuel. It's chapter 5, verse 7. And it says in there, and David conquered the stronghold of Zion, which is the city of David, which is Jerusalem. So Zion references Jerusalem. That's what Zion is. It references Jerusalem. And then when you keep going, in the book of Kings, you have chapter 8, verse 1, then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the princes of the fathers of the children of Israel, unto King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the covenant, which is basically the Torah of the Lord, out of the city of David, which is Zion. And once again, Zion is referenced directly to Jerusalem. And then again, in Lamentations, it talks about the precious children of Zion, which is chapter 4, verse 2. So it keeps referencing Zion, and it's referencing the children of Israel, which of course are Jews, and it's referencing the city of David, which is Jerusalem. So everything stems from Jerusalem in the Jewish faith, and no other faith stems from Jerusalem as the Jewish faith does. It is an important city to some degree, for sure, amongst the three monotheistic religions, but it's very different for Jews than it is for both Christians and Muslims, because many Christians, the Vatican is in Rome, and that's Catholic, of course, but that's very important. the Rome. Not that Jerusalem is not. Then you have Mecca and Medina for the Muslims, but you only have Jerusalem. You have three other holy cities, but Jerusalem by far is the most important. And the three other holy cities are Tiberias and Sfat and Hebron, are all within the state of Israel. So everything's within Israel, which is now sometimes referred to Zion. It's expanded from Jerusalem, but it's directly related to Jerusalem.
That was very well explained. Makes a ton of sense. Thank you for that. But so it's funny, though, not funny, but ironic, that after October 7th, a friend said, I don't hate Jews. I just hate Zionists. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because they look at Zionists as colonizers. It's all in one little package that they've wrapped this in. It seems that we have taken something from someone else. So I was taken aback by this. And I think that in part, certainly you have explained this, but so how do you marry up what they're doing here? Now they're anti-Zionist because they're colonizers and they're settlers. How do you explain that?
Okay. The term settler, and what this friend of yours, I use the term friend in quotes, of course.
Yeah, me too.
She hates Jews. That it's as simple as that. She does hate Jews. Is it rational to say you're not against Italy, you just don't like Italians? You're not against France, you just don't like French people. You're not against Germany, you just don't like Germans. So none of those make sense. So this whole idea, so she does dislike Jews. She doesn't know any different. Maybe she just learned something that was incorrect, but she's definitely warped. No question is warped, because who hates all of a certain people? And as I said, Zionists believe in the Jewish right to the land of Zion, which again is in the Bible. Now, it's hard to say that the Jews are settlers when the Bible is thousands of years old, before, of course, Jesus was born even, and before Muhammad was born. So how are the Jews settlers if it's in the Bible? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob walked the path that's now called either the Shomron, Judah, and Samaria, or you can call it the West Bank, but it's part of Israel. So that's the first. The second is there were two previous kingdoms of Israelites, and this since 1948 is the third. It's the third time the Jews have been there, but they've been there for thousands of years. They never left. Jews have never left. And Mark Twain was there in the mid-19th century and wrote about the Jewish people there. So that has to be understood. In 1917, if you want to just talk about the last century, in 1917, Lord Balfour had something called the Balfour Declaration, which was November of 1917. They talked about the Jewish homeland. That's what it talks about in the Balfour Declaration. But there's no boundaries in the Balfour Declaration. A month later, basically, the Ottoman Empire did fall, and then the British had something called the Mandate for Palestine. That was 1917. End of the World War I was 1918, also called the Great War. You fast forward 30 years, you have the state of Israel born. Jews come. Jews are there in 1948. Now, what was this land prior to 1948? It was never a country. The state of Israel is the first country to ever be on that land. And states, city-states, if you want to call them that, or countries, have been around for approximately 400 years, 500 years. But no one ever claimed this land as a state. It was part of the Ottoman Empire, it was part of the British Mandate, and it was a trade route between East and West. It was very critical between Europe and Asia, but it was never part of a country, never. In 1948, approximately 750,000 Arabs decided to leave because they were encouraged to leave by the Arab leaders who said, we're going to we're going to demolish the Jews and this new fledgling state of Israel. And once we kill all the Jews and demolish them, you'll be able to move back. So these 750,000 Arabs, roughly, down on their own free will. In fact, Ben Gurion, it's been written, you can see it, where he writes he wants them to stay to help build the country. At the same time, roughly 750,000 Jews were actually expelled from Arab lands. And they came generally to the land of Israel, to the state of Israel. And that's what happened. So you had a population shift. But the settler, I don't mind the term settler, but colonizer it's not, because to colonize means you're taking the land from someone else. Settler is fine, you settled the land. But colonizers, they didn't, because they never took the land from anyone else.
Wow. Thank you for that great explanation, Brian. So now I have a quick follow-up question for you, because I think that so many people really do not understand the concept of Palestine. The propaganda out there about Palestine is taking hold, and it's taking hold deeply, especially amongst young people, as we have seen on our own college campuses. And that propagandist lie is that the Jewish people have taken from the Palestinians a country they call Palestine, which of course we call Israel. And so the Palestinians simply want their country back. And as I said before, if it takes the annihilation of all the people of Israel and all Jews, by the way, around the world, so be it. So can you please explain to us the concept of Palestine and just how this propagandist narrative has taken hold across the planet?
So just the term Palestine is a couple thousand years old from Philistia. So
Yes.
it's a Roman term, Philistia. The original Palestinians of 100 years ago were all Jews. Every one of them was a Jew. The Jews called themselves Palestinians. That's what they called themselves before 1948. They had the Palestinian American Bank. They had the Palestinian Post. Everything was Palestinian. The Arabs called themselves Arabs. They didn't call themselves Palestinians. They called them Arabs. In 1948, the state of Israel was declared and founded, and the Israelis, or the Jews, decided it's the land of Israel. We will now call ourselves Israel, which left open the term Palestinian. So in 1964, Arafat goes to Moscow. The KGB tells them, hey, this term is open. You can now claim the term Palestinian and you're good to go. And so therefore, you'll see Palestinians starting with 64 referred to Arabs. But before 64, it was basically not used very much at all before 64. But if you look before 48, it was used only in reference to Jews. So this idea of a Palestinian as being an Arab is a made-up term that's literally approximately 60 years old.
Oh my gosh, you have clarified this so well for us. Thank you. Okay, Brian, so here is my final question. You are on the board of directors of ZOA, or Zionists of America. So I'd like to ask you, though I am sure that ZOA has many initiatives these days, what is ZOA's primary focus right now?
ZOA is trying to maintain a voice that is pro-Israel and doesn't give in to, not just ZOA, but other organizations, give in to these ideas of a two-state solution and a deal and peace prospects that don't materialize. And what I mean by that is that every, quote, deal, end quote, is really just pushing Israel to make concessions, because the other side has yet to ever make a concession. You can go before Oslo in 93, then 95, or after Oslo. Every president of the United States, many people in the United Nations, member states of the United Nations, and now the EU, they have all these ideas for peace plans, but every idea rests upon Israel giving up more and more, whether it be land or control. And that's all it is. So it's really a farce. The whole idea of a peace plan is a farce. And the reason it's a farce is the other side does not recognize Jewish right to a homeland. So if they don't recognize the Jewish right to a homeland, there's always going to be conflict. So it's a non sequitur to have peace with a neighbor who doesn't believe you have a right there.
Okay, Brian, so let me jump in real quickly for just a second, because you just said something that many folks will question, and that is that there is no peace plan. So the Biden-Harris administration, as I call them, and their puppets, the CCP-style propagandist media, as I call them, are repeating the same narrative. And that is that both Israel and Hamas must agree to Biden's peace plan. And that basically means a ceasefire, which equates to, in my humble opinion, a surrender by Israel. And then sometimes they will mention the release of the rest of the hostages, sometimes. But what's very odd about all of this is that Israel didn't start this war. Hamas started this war. But largely, the entire West is asking Israel to surrender. I personally think that Hamas should be surrendering. So this so-called peace plan is really messed up. What say you?
There is no peace plan. I've said from the beginning, there is no peace plan. It's a false narrative.
Okay.
It gets people excited. There's no such thing. The whole and the idea of a ceasefire is just to give up. This is the equivalent of America getting invaded in Pearl Harbor and then becoming involved in World War II approximately 2 years after it started, and then landing on Normandy and finally breaching Normandy and moving inland. And then a few months later, before the war is over, let's say it would be by this time, the end of 44, people calling for a ceasefire. All right, just don't kill anymore, just have a ceasefire. That wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked. You have to go to the end till the other side gives up. The ceasefire doesn't work because in that case, the Germans would reconstitute. And you look at throughout time, if you didn't defeat Japan in August of 1945, Japan would have reconstituted. This happens time and time again. So the idea of a peace plan is absurd because the only way that there'll be peace is when the other side says, we recognize your right to exist. That's the only time there'll be peace. So every opportunity that the current politicians and negotiators, they have to say, oh, we have a peace plan, is only to get the public excited. Oh, we're going to have some peace plan. It's never going to happen. And the other thing I just want to mention on the two-state solution is the last time there was a solution, it didn't work out very well for the Jews. It was called the final solution. And the final solution didn't work out with 6 million Jews and 1.5 million of them being children being exterminated and slaughtered. So that's the first. And the second is there are approximately 22 Arab states. So it's not a two-state solution. That would be a 24-state solution. So they already have a 23-state solution, if you want to say the 22 Arab states, the one Jewish state. So they already have 22 plus 1. I don't think that a 23 plus 1 makes a big difference.
So, Brian, thank you for talking about the numbers, because you know what is funny is that I have never heard this administration or their mainstream media puppets mention the fact that, as you said, there are already 22 Arab states in the region and only one Jewish state. The focus is always on the very powerful bad guys of Israel and the one small, poor oppressed region of Gaza. I think that's intentional to brainwash the masses to believe that the poor, innocent Arab Gazans are alone in all this. And they're not, or they certainly shouldn't be, as there are hundreds of millions of Arabs surrounding them.
If I could just add on one thing.
You bet.
The people in Gaza, the civilians we'll call them, how many Arab states who have the same culture, the same language, the same religion, same very similar ethnicity, how many Arab states have taken in Gazan civilians? The answer, zero.
Yeah.
Zero. So there's got to be some thought. Why do the Arabs not want their own people? It's a curious question.
You know, it is a very curious question, isn't it, Brian? Because what is interesting is that with the advent of Russia's attack on Ukraine, you had millions of Ukrainian refugees welcomed into Eastern Europe and beyond, I think, which was supported and encouraged by the West, including America. But for some really strange reason, that wasn't the case for the Gazan people. As you said, the surrounding Arab countries didn't open their borders or welcome any of them. So yes, this really is curious and should be a question from the world as to why the people of Gaza were forcibly caged like animals, unable to leave an inevitable war zone. And you heard nothing from the West, including America, about this. Absolute silence. And I'm going to wrap up with this because what is so very, very sad is that the West, as well as I believe some Arab countries, have sent billions of dollars to Gaza over the last 20 years or so. And these poor people haven't reaped any benefits from this vast amount of money. Have they, Brian?
There's been billions upon billions of dollars flowing into Gaza, mostly from Europe and the US, but also China has gotten involved. So billions of dollars. What do they have to show for it? Not high-tech schools, not high-tech hospitals, not paved roads everywhere, not an infrastructure with banking and economy. They have 300 miles of tunnels and weapons. That's what they have to show for it.
That's right.
Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005.
Yes.
So the attack occurred 18 years after Israel pulled out. They had billions of dollars in 18 years to build infrastructure, but they decided not to.
That's right. People were saying it could have looked like a Dubai. They had
Absolutely.
so much potential there, but wasted it. And so very sad. It's really a sad situation. Brian, this has been, as I thought it would be, very informative. I appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. And I hope you'll come back and when things are in a better state. And I hope that's sooner rather than later.
I hope that's sometime in 2025. That's what I'm hoping. It won't be before then, but I'm hoping it's in 2025. It'll be my pleasure to come back where we can have a more uplifting conversation of positive developments, Liz.
Absolutely. All right, Brian. Thank you again so much for joining me and keep up the great fight because those of us who see it cannot stay silent. We have got to be vocal the best we can and be productive in support of the Jewish people in Israel, right?
Absolutely. The way state of Israel goes will be Western civilization's direction.
Exactly right. All right. Hey, Brian, thank you again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Liz.
Okay. You take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so just to backtrack a bit before wrapping up, I wanted to tell y'all that many months ago, as I was contemplating the idea of a podcast, my plan was to begin by introducing you to some of the folks that have inspired me over the last year since October 7th. And Brian was one of those people. As you heard, we connected and traveled together to Washington, D.C. back in November of 2023. Without Brian as my traveling companion, I'm not sure I would be here talking with you today. Because though we didn't talk about it today, Brian mentioned something to me back in November as we wrapped up that huge day at midnight. He actually suggested and encouraged me to come visit our local Chabad. But the one thing that he said that really stuck with me was that, Liz, a Jew is a Jew to Chabad. So I took that leap, and I am so happy that I did, because at Chabad, a Jew is a Jew. No judgment, and I love that. So this is my formal thank you to Brian, which I don't think I ever properly did. Thank you, Brian. Now on to the discussion about Zionism. As I mentioned earlier, that chat with Brian Grodman only scratched the surface of the topic of Zionism. There is a ton of information out there on the internet, as you might imagine. But sadly, as with most topics or issues these days, most have become not only controversial at a minimum, but many, like Zionism and Zionists, have become targets of extreme levels of politicization. polarization, and even hate and violence. So what I was hoping to do here with the topic of Zionism, which, as I said, I know little to nothing about, is to gain some minimum or basic understanding of the issue, and not to jump into the proverbial lion's den of controversy without educating myself just a little bit and maybe even more. Because I gotta tell y'all, as I was preparing for my chat with Brian, it took a lot of sifting through the clearly biased and many hateful articles and posts to find some information that was fact-based so that I had some basic knowledge of this topic when speaking with Brian. And yes, Brian, as he said, is a proud Zionist. But what I loved about this conversation was that he laid out some basic historical biblical facts about the origins of the root word Zion and how we can connect it to the term and the movement of Zionism. And for me personally, this makes a ton of sense and is a great way for me to begin forming an opinion about the topic of Zionism. We started from the beginning, and I really love that. I will never admittedly be an expert on Zionism, but now I feel I've got a great start and can move ahead and, yes, continue sifting out as much of the bias as possible, which isn't easy these days. But in doing so, I, or we, can continue to learn about the topic of Zionism in order to make a more informed judgment of our own. And I kind of love that plan, don't y'all? So I want to thank Brian for helping us lay that groundwork and for his friendship. And that's a wrap. Thank you all for joining me today on A Journey to Milk and Honey. Before you go, don't forget that you can stay connected with us on social media, as we're on all major platforms at JMH Podcast, and we would love to hear from you. You can also find us on YouTube at JMH Podcast or A Journey to Milk and Honey. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications, as it really helps out our channel. And wherever you listen to your podcast, make sure to follow us there to stay updated on new episodes and to keep your journey going. If you're looking for more, you can visit us online at ajourneytomilkandhoney.com or jmhpodcast.com. Oh, and by the way, if you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to leave a review or comment, as your feedback helps the podcast to grow and improve, and we truly value your support. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and shalom.